So in case you've been in the dark the past few hours, pun intended, NERSA has granted Eskom an 18.65% tariff increase for the 2023-2024 year. So you'll soon be paying more for electricity while getting less. The decision has been met so far with criticism from all quarters. Let's get reaction now from SAFTU's Zwelinzima Vavi. Mr. Vavi, good morning and thank you very much for your time. Your reaction as organised labour to this increase?
We can't even say we are shocked because in any case, we have been into this path now for 15 years. 15 years of load shedding, 15 years of way above inflation increases. Nevertheless, this remains a travesty. When NERSA was conducting public hearings, we made it very clear that the 32% will just throw everybody under the bus. Still, the 18.65% that they've approved is absolutely going to have a devastating impact, in particular amongst the working class people, especially women. And Eskom's strategy of aiming to privatize generation of electricity, and whilst it is moving at a snail pace in decarbonizing, will have a long-term to develop. And Eskom has been so badly managed and regulated that giving it more money without full transformation is going to be a recipe for more failure. We are walking right very rapidly towards the road towards Zimbabwe, where Zimbabwe was and how things started to fall apart. And unfortunately, South Africa must look at this not just narrowly about the 18.5% or 18.65%, but it must also look at it in relation to the rest of other development in South Africa, load shedding, the levels of criminality, violence, the dysfunctional economy, of inequalities and of unemployment, particularly amongst youth people. Things are falling apart. I don't know how many people are still believing that there's going to be a future under the current administration led by the eNCA, unfortunately. Eskom has thrown 700 billion rands on capital expenditure since 2007, but it produces a 25% less electricity today than it did then. The money has gone mainly to pay the corrupt Gorogoro, Medupi and Kusile coal-fired power plants, for which Eskom owes most of the 400 billion rands of liabilities and debt to lenders like World Bank and the Western governments, import-export banks, which would have been cancelled under normal circumstances as forming part of what we call the odious debt, and which is something that we make a call now. Without workers mobilizing on the ground and uniting with the rest of society to demand an end to this road we are traveling in, I'm afraid there will be no future for our country and for the generations to come.
When you say mobilize, are you suggesting perhaps taking to the streets? We were speaking to the PSCU, that union right now, saying perhaps taking to the streets, insofar as workers are concerned, would be somewhat reckless because it would lead to even bigger problems for the country.
That's how we are being blackmailed into doing absolutely nothing. Look, I find it absolutely abnormal that this country of 62 million people keep on bringing the next chick for these guys to clap us on. Left, right, and center, we're doing nothing. 800% higher tariffs since 2007 is something that would have led to massive demonstrations if it was happening to the democratic world everywhere else. But here in South Africa, only SAFTU, the EFF, and very few other organizations of the working class have been demonstrating to express and outrage at the fact that this is happening. Only here in South Africa will you see 82, and yet there is no outrage, there is no demonstrations in the streets. Only in this country will you see 122 people or women being raped every day, and yet there is no outrage in the streets, there's no demonstrations, and there's no massive outflow of anger into the streets. And unfortunately, the more we keep quiet, the more they keep on saying that if you dare raise your finger, you will even see more suffering going forward. And we can't submit to that blackmail any further.
Most structures would say there is outrage, just that many perhaps are not taking to the streets per se because of the fears that we speak of now. But talk to me about the ripple effect here. We're going to have workers that cannot necessarily factor this cost into their monthly costs. What impact will this have on municipalities' ability to actually pay their bills, though, to Eskom?
You can't imagine. You can't even imagine in terms of what's going to be happening to the rest of society when we take an 18% increase, way above the rate of inflation. And you please consider the following. We are already paying 400 rands more for food. And for food basket now, we are paying a 4,853 rands for a family of just 4 people. Already, we were paying a 50 rands more for the KWH in the previous year. And we were paying a total of 787 rands. We are paying already 40% above the rate just before the corona pandemic. For fuel, imagine the combination of a 40% and now an 18.65% for electricity, what it will mean to municipalities. We are now paying a 10.2% for the interest rates, which means that if you have a credit card, a home loan, the bonds, and they are now becoming completely prohibitive. Nobody is going to afford that. More people are going to be losing cars, their homes, and even the goods that they've purchased over years. I mean, no society can afford what we are being taken through in our country. Life has become impossible to live. Imagine, as we're talking about these figures, 50% of the black people are unemployed. Over 50% of the black women population is unemployed. Imagine what they will go through at the end of the month when they must decide what to do about this 18.6.5% in relation to their transport, if they're lucky still to have cars, or to be able to move from the townships into towns in search of employment opportunity. Already, we are paying 36% of our income as workers into the transport cost. Imagine the hygiene products. Imagine the general standards of living of ordinary workers, completely unaffordable. Remember that APSA has already told us that even the higher middle class.
Apologies for interjecting, but it seems this is our reality now. I was even unpacking the World Economic Forum's report, and it seems that the high cost of living is a serious crisis, is a serious threat for the next 2 years. So what can our government do to change this trajectory for the people of South Africa? What would be those low-hanging fruits that could change our fortunes right now with this 18.65% increase?
The first thing that I think we are calling for is that people must occupy the streets. Power concedes nothing without a struggle. If we don't do that, this government will never know, because they are not affected after all. They have their own solars in their rooms, they have their security, they have their private medical aids, they have everything. They have long outsourced themselves from the public. They are completely immune. If we do not put pressure on them, We will continue to have a spokesperson of the president issuing a press conference statement after another to say the president deeply regrets that people are going through the hell that they are going through. We need pressure so that solutions can be found. We need pressure so that they can go back to the World Bank and the IMF where they know they funded corrupt deals in Medupi and Kusile to say we are not willing to pay that 400 billion rands in debt so that we can have resources to address this. And more importantly, we need new leadership. We want this ESCOM CEO to live as early as yesterday so that we can address the reality. The reality is that perhaps we don't even have a crisis of availability of coal. Yes, we are moving very slowly to decarbonize, but we don't have a capacity, a crisis. We have a surplus. The problem we have in ESCOM is inward, is a problem of an engineer to sort out the fact that we have more than 15,000 megawatts of capacity that is not being used because we have no capacity at ESCOM to ensure that we can use that 15,000 more megawatts capacity for the benefit of ensuring that there's no load shedding in this economy. Sort that, show those guys the door and get us decent people. We have our interest as the public at heart instead of all of this nonsense that is being tolerated today.
Do you perhaps have a CEO in mind that could potentially take over from Andre de Ruyter? Because in an engagement or conversation that my colleague JJ Tabani had with the president, he was somebody that said, you know what, it's a very difficult job, you know, for anybody to take on. So one wonders if there are any people raising their hands to take over that position.
We can only hope that the people that were successful in the past raise their hands. All we want is somebody who's competent, somebody who have an experience on ESCOM, somebody who have qualifications, an engineer who can lead a team of other competent engineers that are not corrupt, because that's one of the biggest problems. Somebody who is not going to serve the vested interest of capital, and which are having it nice, by the way, through their pre-arranged tariffs agreement with ESCOM, the PHB bulletins of this world, the Anglo-Americans of this world are paying way below what we are being asked to pay. We want somebody who's committed, who can share this ship into the different direction than this current situation. Andre de Ruyter has led to a situation where we're losing way above the previous record in terms of hours to load shedding. We can't afford to live like this.
Sim Shabalala of Standard Bank says perhaps cast the native in wider and look at somebody abroad. Your views on that?
As long as it is somebody who have the public interest at heart, as long as is somebody who's not going to be serving the vested interest of capital, as long as it's going to be somebody who's going to recognize that electricity, energy, is an essential service that must be provided to the public in a manner that will ensure that we continue to march towards electrification of our society, cheaper, going back to where ESCOM was, being the best provider of electricity, cheaper, in a manner that gave us so much competitive advantage when we are attracting investment to bolster our manufacturing sector and to industrialize our economy again. We don't care where that person is. Nelson Mandela once said, we don't care whether the cat is going to be black and white, as long as this is going to be about advancing the public interest.
You think this will be a sentiment shared by many, because South Africa is very complex in its politics. Sometimes you might think that even in difficult times, they wouldn't care if the cat is black or white. But you might find that it can become a conversation that distracts everybody from power generation, where they say there's somebody who's from abroad that's been brought back, or has been brought to the country. We saw what happened with SAA, back with Coleman Andrews and a number of other people. It was just a lot that were brought in from abroad.
as long as that person, we don't care honestly whether that's going to be somebody from the continent or elsewhere. We are putting a criteria. Give us somebody who is competent, somebody who has the experience, somebody preferably from within ESCOM, somebody who's an engineer with qualification, but more importantly, somebody that has the public interest at heart, who's not going to be serving the vested interest of big business at the expense of the current situation where effectively, by the way, there is an effective apartheid that is being meted out against the black working class residential areas who are seeing even bigger numbers of sitting in the dark through load shedding. We want somebody who's going to ensure that there's a proper maintenance and an end to load shedding. Give us that person and find that person, and 62 million people in South Africa, there has to be many people who can raise their hands and who are not just lawyers dumped there because of their reputation of being able to retrench workers elsewhere, as this current ESCOM CEO was apparently invited to apply on the basis of that track record. No, we want somebody who's going to serve the interest of the public at heart, and that's all we're asking for.
All right, Mr. Vavi,
preferably, of course, but
yes,
preferably a South African, of course, preferably somebody from ESCOM with that experience. But if we can't find somebody within, we have to cast our net wide to solve the crisis.